Welcome to Max Tech, and this is our review of the new M1 Pro MacBook Pro. The new MacBook Pro is an engineering masterpiece that claims multiple world's best trophies for various aspects of the design and performance. And it's all the result of Apple finally going back to their roots and giving their customers what they really want. From sacrificing the slim-looking chamfer design to giving us better cooling performance and ports, all the way to bringing back our function keys and giving us the best 120Hz display in any laptop, we can say for certain that Apple is finally listening. And for the last 2 weeks, we've been putting the various configurations of these new MacBook Pros that we purchased to the test so that we could provide the absolute best first-hand information to all of you guys with the insane amount of comparison videos we've been putting out. But in this review, I'm gonna wrap up all of that info over the past 2 weeks so you can get a general idea of these new MacBook Pros and what makes them so special. So before I get into talking about the new design, the beautiful display, the extra ports, and of course, the performance, I wanna quickly make a point of how long these MacBooks have been carefully planned by Apple. Ever since Intel started to fail back in 2015 with their Skylake chips causing issues for Apple, we've noticed Apple making some weird and annoying changes like removing macOS support for 32-bit apps, deprecating OpenGL, and forcing AMD and Nvidia to use Metal, ultimately causing Nvidia to say bye-bye. But ever since Apple went out on stage and announced the new Apple Silicon transition, we now know that each step was a requirement for these new M1 MacBooks to run, because as we know, these ARM-based chips don't support 32-bit apps, and they absolutely need Metal for optimization because of the way the new tile-based GPUs work. And for the past year, the tech world has been really impressed and intrigued by the original M1 Macs. But behind the curtains, I fully believe that the M1 Macs were actually a beta test for Apple's master plan, or Apple Silicon Endgame, which is these new 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. And in my opinion, the master plan is to create the best laptop in the world, which I believe Apple has achieved, and also to satisfy the widest range of customers to basically take back a huge portion of the laptop market share away from the Windows competition. And to do that, there are 3 pieces to this puzzle: performance, reliability, and design. So let's get right into design first. The new MacBook Pros went back to their roots with a design that looks much thicker now because Apple completely flattened out the top and the bottom instead of the concave 13-inch design that gets thicker in the center. And the real benefit of this new design is that Apple has a lot more internal volume to work with, allowing them to fit in better speakers, larger batteries like the 70 watt-hour on the 14-inch, and a much larger logic board and cooling system. Now, along with that, they redesigned the rubber feet to make the MacBook Pro sit a bit higher from the table, while also enlarging the vents all around the design to improve airflow, even going as far as to add vents inside of the hinge, whereas the previous hinge design was fully sealed. Now, as far as the ports, we've got some huge changes this year, like with the MagSafe connector that is stronger than I expected and is so convenient because you can connect and disconnect it with one hand without having to hold down the MacBook with the other hand like you used to have to do with the USB-C port on previous MacBooks. And of course, it's awesome that Apple was able to supply up to 140 watts of power through MagSafe to enable fast charging, since USB-C is limited to 100 watts. Now, with these MacBook Pros, we now have 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports, but what makes them special is that each one gets its own dedicated controller. So each port now supports the full 40 gigabit per second bandwidth, whereas previously there would be 1 controller for every 2 ports. And in terms of the revival of the HDMI port, I didn't think that I would need it, but it's already come in handy because I recently bought a little projector to watch movies on the wall, and I also purchased a camper trailer together, and I was able to play movies on the TV using HDMI on one of these new MacBook Pros. So now that I have HDMI, I'm pleasantly surprised by how useful it is without having to resort to buying an adapter. And on top of that, we now have the new SD card slot that supports UHS 2 speeds, and while we've already moved on to CF Express cards for recording video, we still record audio externally using SD cards. And there are so much more use cases for them, like drone photography, GoPros, and much more. Now moving on to the inside, we can see both some minor and major differences in terms of design. So before I get into the new notch display, let me cover the differences on the bottom half of the MacBook Pro. The touch bar is finally gone, and I'm incredibly happy about it because the only thing I would ever use it for in the past was adjusting the brightness and the volume, which was always so much more annoying to do with the touch bar. So I'm very happy that we've got the full-size function keys on these MacBook Pros. I also really love the black anodized well surrounding the keys because it helps make the text stand out more than it ever did before. And as far as the trackpad, it's still the best in the world, beating out every single Windows laptop out there. Now moving on to the speakers, the new ones on the 14-inch are miles ahead of the previous 13-inch model, with an overall more full sound with greater separation of frequencies with a huge boost in the bass notes. Just hear it for yourself. And then with the 16-inch model, the bass gets even deeper and louder with more volume overall, basically giving Apple the trophy for having the best speakers in any laptop ever. I guarantee it. Now, Apple also improved the webcams, bringing the resolution up to 1080p while also improving the sensor and the lens. And as you can see in this photo comparison to the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro, the sharpness has been greatly improved, but the biggest difference is in the dynamic range. Not only are the bright lights in the window less blown out than before, but the shadows in my face are also brighter, especially in my hair, where the detail was previously crushed. And on top of that, we also hear an improvement in terms of the microphone quality. This is the video and microphone quality on the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. And this is the video and microphone quality on the new 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro. Now moving on to the display portion of the chassis, I love that the chin area on the bottom is darker than it was before. And I don't really see why Apple had to get rid of the MacBook Pro text, but it definitely makes it look cleaner. And as far as the display itself, the new notch stands out the most, but I can genuinely say that over the course of these past 2 weeks, I've already gotten used to it on my personal 16-inch MacBook Pro. And what's awesome is that when you're in full screen mode, the entire top bar turns black and the notch disappears, so it's not distracting at all. And the major benefit of the notch is that the bezels are significantly slimmed down, and this display now looks so much more immersive than it did before, and I've gotta say that I absolutely love it. But the real magic of the new display is the quality. With the new mini LED backlight technology that can reach up to 1600 nits of brightness while viewing HDR content. So as you can see in this comparison to the M1 MacBook Air, it's on a whole new level of brightness, and it's awesome that you don't have to sacrifice anything else like color accuracy to get it. And there's not going to be any burn-in issues like you get with OLED displays. And even when you're not watching HDR content, the black levels are much more black than before, so you get better contrast when anything black is on the screen. And you don't get those massive gray bars on the top and bottom when watching movies. And because of Apple's top-class anti-reflectivity coatings, Apple's mini LED display honestly gets deeper blacks than many OLED laptops out there, like the 4K OLED Razer Blade Advanced that is so reflective that it ruins the quality. The only issue with these new mini LED displays is that there are some blooming issues while watching movies, where you can notice a haze around bright objects or in general when you're watching a darker scene. But a pleasant surprise for me that I really enjoy day to day is that even though Apple claimed it can reach the same 500 nits of brightness for regular content, it actually gets a bit brighter than the old displays, maybe 50 nits or so. Now on top of all of that, Apple has added 120Hz ProMotion technology, which is the absolute best feature for many different use cases. In terms of gaming, you can finally make use out of getting 120 FPS instead of previous machines being limited to 60 Hz. And even if you can't reach 120 FPS, ProMotion acts exactly like G-Sync, matching the display refresh rate to the FPS on the screen so you don't get any screen tearing issues or anything else. But on the flip side, you can watch movies, which are most commonly filmed at 24 FPS, and the display will slow down to 24 Hz, saving battery life compared to every other laptop on the planet, refreshing at 60 Hz, and wasting battery power. So with all that said, I think this new display takes the trophy for being the absolute best laptop display in the world. But to put an end to the design section of this video, the last thing I want to mention is the build quality. Apple has been fine-tuning the quality of their materials over the past decade, and it's at a level right now where no other laptop on the market can compete. It's just built so thoughtfully that you know you won't find better build quality anywhere else. So basically, with all of those design changes, Apple is truly satisfying a much larger portion of the consumer market, especially users who really want all of those extra ports and of course, such a good display. Now moving on to the next piece of the puzzle for making this the best laptop in the world, we have reliability. macOS is incredibly reliable compared to Windows, which would sometimes give you blue screens of death and have various issues with drivers and apps crashing. With macOS, you rarely get any of that. And compared to older Intel models, there are no more GPU driver issues now that Apple is using their own custom GPUs. And going further, the fans never turn on during regular use, with the chassis always staying cool to the touch compared to my old 2018 Intel model that gets hot and turns the fans on basically anytime I use it on my lap. On top of that, Apple's unified memory is incredibly efficient alongside the super fast SSD speed, which helps give you awesome performance even while your RAM is full by using swap memory. And these MacBook Pros are unique because you get full performance while on battery and very fast SSD transfer speeds compared to other laptops like the Razer Blade Advanced, which will actually slow down SSD transfers if you're not plugged into the charger, which is mind-blowing and embarrassing. And compared to previous MacBooks, these ones are even more reliable because we now have magic keys on all of the models compared to the old flawed butterfly keys. And on top of that, iFixit has confirmed that Apple is now using longer display ribbon cables on these new MacBook Pros that won't wear out over time. And finally, the resale value of these MacBook Pros is going to be better than it's ever been because first of all, last year's M1 Max had resale value that was already much better than previous Intel MacBooks. And as we all know, those Intel models were known for having much better resale value than basically any Windows laptop. So these new MacBook Pros will hold their value better than any laptop in the world. And the last thing that makes these MacBooks great in terms of reliability is the incredible battery life. We compared the base $2,000 14-inch MacBook Pro to a new Surface Laptop Studio that is actually $100 more expensive. And after all of our testing, the Surface was left with 17% battery life, while the MacBook Pro was at a mind-blowing 56%. But the thing that really blew my mind was when we compared the 14-inch to the M1 MacBook Air, which is notorious for having better battery life than basically any Windows laptop out there. On the Surface, it seems like the Air should have better battery life because it's rated for 15 hours of wireless web compared to only 11 hours on the new 14-inch MacBook Pro, but in our testing, the 14-inch actually finished with 46% battery life compared to 44% on the Air, and that is because the Air was taking so much longer to finish all of the benchmarks and tests that we were running. And that right there is the key. These new MacBook Pros are incredibly powerful machines, and I honestly believe that if you balance out the CPU and GPU workloads, they're also the most powerful laptops ever made. And with that said, let's get into the third and final piece of the puzzle for being the best laptops in the world: performance. In this review, I'm gonna focus solely on the M1 Pro chip in both the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro for most of the common consumers and professionals out there, and we'll be saving the M1 Max chip models for a more in-depth, high-end professional focused review in a couple of weeks. First of all, these M1 Pro MacBook Pros are the fastest in the world for web browsing performance, making them super snappy, as you can see, compared to the Surface Laptop Studio. And in terms of single-core performance in Geekbench 5, it's not much higher than the M1 chip, but it blows away the Intel competition. Now in multi-core, these new M1 Pro MacBook Pros are quite literally the fastest laptops you can buy right now, which gives it a world's best trophy and will help fly through tasks like photo editing and everything else. Now, if you bring that multi-core performance into a Cinebench R23 stress test, you can now see the differences in long-term CPU performance. And I do want to mention that the fans stayed incredibly silent compared to the Intel machines. And that's the exact type of performance that will be going into something like photo editing in Lightroom Classic. And as you can see, the new MacBook Pros are absolutely insanely fast at doing this, and even the M1 Air was faster than the new Surface. Now, I do want to emphasize that a big piece of the puzzle for this crazy performance is that the new M1 Pro chip has a much higher 200 gigabytes per second memory bandwidth with 16-channel memory, which really helps with photo editing performance like this. Now, moving on to some Mac exclusive tests like Logic Pro Music Production, these new MacBook Pros handle a massive amount of tracks, much more than the common person will be mixing, so this means you won't ever have to listen to the fans with regular use, unlike the older Intel 16-inch model. We also ran our Xcode benchmark for all of the programmers out there, and we were pleasantly surprised by how fast these new MacBook Pros finished compared to older Intel MacBook Pros, which took over twice as long. So as you can see, the CPU performance has never been this good, making these MacBook Pros the fastest laptops in the world for CPU workloads. But now, moving on to the graphics side of things, gaming performance is extremely impressive with these new MacBook Pros under the optimized GFX Bench Metal test. And even the binned 14-core model beat out the previous best 5600M GPU in the 16-inch. We then moved on to testing 3D rendering performance in Blender, and there is a massive difference compared to the old Intel MacBook Pros. But thanks to the optimized NVIDIA CUDA GPU, the Surface Laptop Studio actually beat out the new 16-core M1 Pro. And now getting into video editing, this is where things get very interesting because a lot of common codecs rely on the video encoders and decoders, which can actually limit the GPU performance potential. For example, the most common format, 4K H.264, actually limits the performance of the new MacBook Pros, so it's not really a big upgrade compared to even the 13-inch M1 MacBook Air, which was already faster than Intel's QuickSync encoder. And then if we take that same test into DaVinci Resolve, we can see that the NVIDIA GPU in the Surface Laptop Studio is a lot slower than these new MacBook Pros because it's being limited by its encoders. And if you want even more performance out of the new MacBook Pros, you can go with the M1 Max chip, which has double the encoders. But moving on, the beauty of these new MacBook Pros is that they come with ProRes encoders and decoders, so they can play the Mac exclusive ProRes footage back like a dream. But in terms of exporting, they are miles faster than the old Intel MacBook Pros, as well as the M1 Air. Now, with all of that testing out of the way, we can say for sure that the M1 Pro chip is the fastest laptop chip in the world in terms of the CPU. And while the 16-core GPU in the M1 Pro isn't quite as good as the higher-end GPU options out there, like the 3070 and the 3080, the awesome optimization and video encoders and decoders help it stay incredibly competitive on the graphics side. And if you want the most GPU power, we definitely recommend going for the 32-core GPU with the M1 Max chip, which we'll be reviewing very soon. But if you take a step back and factor in everything that you're getting with the M1 Pro MacBook Pro, like the incredibly fast SSDs, the insanely efficient unified memory, which never chokes up, and the optimized performance, I can say for a fact that you're getting the best bang for the buck by far compared to the competition. And that's even before you factor in all of the other benefits like the design aspects, the reliability, and the resale value. And as you guys saw in those performance results, even the base 14-inch MacBook Pro for $2,000 and the binned chip is still incredibly powerful. And that's actually the model that I would recommend if you want the absolute best bang for your buck on one of these new MacBook Pros. So with that said, I've got to say that I've never been so impressed by an Apple product before, with Apple straight up leaping ahead of the competition. And I fully believe that this MacBook Pro alone will cause a laptop revolution where laptop makers will begin to put new, more efficient ARM-based chips into their laptops to attempt to compete with Apple in terms of performance and especially battery life. And the crazy thing is that Apple is just getting started, and they've got a whole lot more surprises for us coming next year with their Mac Pro. But as for these 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, I honestly believe that they are by far the best laptops in the world right now if you factor in the entire package and everything that you're getting. So there has literally never been a better time to buy a Mac, especially since I don't expect Apple to update these machines until 2023. So if you're ready to make the jump, we'll provide links to these MacBook Pros down in the description below. And if you're curious about the M1 Max models, go ahead and click the circle above to subscribe so you don't miss out on that review. This has been Vadim with Max Tech. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.